to A Time for Heroes, Episode 1 of the Rugby League Digest new series on the Super League War. I'm Michael Adams here with Andrew Paskin. How are you, Andy?
Hello, mate. I'm very, very excited. We finally made it.
We finally did. So this is the first of a three-part look at season 1994. And just to set it up, I don't suppose we'll spend too much time going into why we name the episodes as we do as we go forward. But this episode, A Time for Heroes, I've chosen specifically because the cliche about there being no heroes in this story, that could have been invented for the Super League War. Very few parties involved emerged without reputations tarnished or integrity questioned. And as we all know, as we all remember, and as we'll hear much more about, it quickly became a very ugly time in rugby league. But just before that, 1994 was viewed by us as kids and many other people in the game as some kind of a high watermark.
Was it the actual Halcyon days of the game?
Well, this is what I want to spend a bit of time interrogating, because it's always been, kind of just assumed in my mind, 1994, that was the era, that was the high peak of rugby league in my lifetime. And I thought maybe that was just the recollections of a child, and was it really that good? And what struck me, I saw a 2003 issue of Big League, which was then being edited by Neil Cadigan, and in his editor's column, he spoke about 1994 with basically the exact same kind of sentiment. So there's obviously more to it than just we were kids, rugby league was exciting.
In my mind, you read every year in rugby league about some sort of Halcyon days being referenced, but in my mind, it was the greatest year. I was 14. My team was a superstar bunch of thoroughbreds. A lot of personal meaning to the season for me, so it just ticks every box for me on every level. But always danger in rugby league of rose-coloured glasses.
Yeah,
always.
and that's the other main reason I wanted to start here, because there is a lot to interrogate. In many ways, the successes of 1994 was somewhat of a house of cards. We're going to be looking at all of that as future episodes go on. But as we're going to be spending the next year or so getting very grubby, there's not a lot of hope, not a lot of optimism or positivity. I wanted to start this on a positive note. Well, as positive as you and I can get.
But it's necessary because this is what set the tone for the whole thing. So it's absolutely necessary to start here. And it's also enjoyable to do so.
Yeah, so that's why we're here today, just to start this series off on a high note, and so as we've done with our previous season recap, we're going to be taking a general look at rugby league at the time before going into the highs and lows of the season, filtered through the premiers and losing grand finalists Canberra and Canterbury.
Do you want to just do a bit of an initial thought here on the state of the game there? Just on top of the head thought. We're 2 years after the sort of change of the game. 92 is the end of the 5 metre rule sort of scrappy vibed game. Then 93 it sort of become a bit more structured. By 94, we're looking at the modern game.
So 93 is actually when the 10 metre rule officially changed.
And it didn't really gel that quickly. So halfway through the year.
That was halfway through the year, which we've got some more talk about that later in the show, so we'll save that. But insanity. So yeah, it did take a while for all those changes to come into effect. Plus, you had the coming excitement of the new clubs, and we're definitely going to interrogate whether going to 20 teams was a good idea. Spoiler, it wasn't. But you had Canberra and Brisbane. I think that and the new clubs and everything that was happening made it a more exciting time by default.
True. But I just wanted to touch on that because you watch an old grand final, say, Balmain Canterbury, it's like watching a different game. It's not even the same game. In 94, when we had to rewatch that, which wasn't a big ask for me, I've watched it every year anyway, it just felt like the modern game.
Except for the play the ball, I found was so slow.
Well, that was like an MMA fight, but it was like, it was ridiculous.
But yeah, I think that there's definitely a marked difference between watching football from that season and watching mid-late 80s football.
Yeah, for sure.
So I thought to get started, a good way of getting a feel for the overall pulse of the game at the time was to look at the Rugby League Week players Q&A which is always a source of some very, very funny stuff.
What I love about those is the inane taste in TV shows and music.
That's on my run sheet here. I just want to set up the Q&A for this year because they actually went with a themed Q&A, Kangaroo Contenders. And if you look at the players who they got, they did pretty well of basically picking that Kangaroo squad. Starting the year with Rod Maybon, maybe a misfire, but from there they did pretty well.
Well, he was pretty hot.
He was for a time,
at that time, yeah. It wouldn't be hard to get all the contenders, though. You just ring Bozo and go, who are you picking?
But let's start with some of those tastes in music and TV. By far and away the most popular show among football players of 1994, Home Improvement.
Of course.
I think about 50% of players voted for Tim the Toolman. Most of the others went for Heather Locklear et al. on Melrose Place.
Oh, fair enough.
Rod Wishart saying he had to speed home from training to make sure he didn't miss it.
We're talking about like waiting for Bert's Backyard for the football. That era of television.
Yeah.
Like, I was going to catch an episode of Empty Nest before I go out. Like, it was just awful.
One Player's Choice of TV show stuck in my mind as really laying the blueprint for rugby league broadcasting as it is in 2019, and that was Matthew Johns' favourite show, Hale and Pace.
Oh, mate. I mean, I'm surprised he didn't come out with a rubber chicken on his show. That's ultimate.
Music was similarly very stock. That you were seeing a start of a new era with Wendell Saylor and Brad Fittler both picking What a Man by Salt and Pepper as their favourite song. Beyond that, it was a lot of Chisel.
But, I mean, would you say over the years the ultimate rugby league band trope would be Hunters and Collectors?
I've always thought of them more as an AFL band.
Yeah, maybe you're right.
Because they've got the Holy Grail on the
coverage. No, you're right. Like, I'm just trying to think of like the one you see all the time.
I don't know if it's representative of rugby league as a whole, but I thought it was so apt that Paul Mary McGregor's choice of music was any John Cougar song.
You forget how, I mean, when they're playing in the 90s, they were really 80s guys.
Mm.
It's like, you don't really think of them that way.
Yeah. One TV show I missed, Billy Moore chose Sale of the Century's Battle of the Codes, which he actually won that year. So
I love Billy Moore.
It's funny how much those kinds of things mattered to you when you were a kid, and even now I'd still want the rugby league guys to win. But
I was so proud that he had an intellect.
Yeah,
because I had a reputation of being dummies.
Yeah, beat Phil Kearns in the final. So
good.
Yeah.
With the 80s music taste, I still remember Sterlo on the Footy show, like in the early days of the Footy show, when they were talking about rap, and he goes, "Rap, that's got a silent C at the front, isn't it?" Like he was like despised rap music.
I like John Simon's answer to favourite song. It was, there are a couple of songs I like, but I don't have a favourite. I like a couple of songs.
Real music buff.
One thing I noted with this Q&A, you're really seeing the end of the part-time player and the start of professionalism. So it was probably, I don't know, maybe 30% of the players interviewed that year either had as their job professional footballer or didn't list a job. And then you had a lot of marketing officers.
Yeah, I mean, crazy to think that they were still working part-time, isn't it?
But I wanted to ask you about that. So we had a lot of variances of marketing officer, promotions officer, development officer.
I first came across the term marketing officer in 1988 on the pink footy cards.
Yeah.
That was a big job, was marketing officer, which, as we know, isn't a job. It's just money from the club to put on a polo shirt and turn up at a few events. But
some of them I think would have taken. So, for instance, Billy Moore's job was North's junior representative coordinator. I think he would have thrown himself wholeheartedly
Absolutely.
into that. Brad Fittler as promotions officer, I wouldn't think would have extended more to a few appearances at Panthers. Probably more than he was asked to do, really.
I think if you've got flow breathing down your neck at North Sydney, I think you take your juniors' responsibilities quite seriously. But I remember when I was in primary school in Newcastle and Toronto, they had Tony Butterfield and Robbie O'Davis came. It must have been 1990. This Batlow Apples was a sponsor. And they had trays and trays of Batlow Apples and they were handing them out. It was the coolest thing ever.
Yeah.
Yeah, or every time I see Battle Apples, it reminds me of it.
Mm.
So that must have been a marketing officer type role.
Yeah.
And Butts went on to do a business degree with me at Newcastle.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's interesting.
The great man.
Yeah, well, as we'll hear in the Super League, once we get into the Super League proper, cut his teeth by representing the Johns brothers in their negotiations.
They've stepped up to John Fordham now. John Singleton as well.
A couple of other things that stood out to me was a look at the sporting landscape as a whole. A lot of, when people were asked if they could be any other sportsman, who would they be? A lot of Michael Jordan. Jason Stevens, I thought this was fascinating. Sydney Kings basketballer Leon Trimmingham.
Well, he was a massive star back then. He was dunking on everybody. That's hilarious.
And similarly, when it came to most respected Australian, there was a lot of Fred Hollows and a few sportsmen like Greg Norman. Mark Carroll picked Mike Whitney, saying he's a real likeable bloke.
Well, I suppose you need to be something that you're not.
Staying on Mark Carroll, one of the good G-ups in the Q&A that year was his most embarrassing moment was on the Kangaroo tour when Paul Sirenen was pretending to play the piano. It was a pianola, and I thought he was really playing. That's a good G-up.
He's like, how good's this?
But on Paul Sirenen, I wanted to... This really stood out to me. So he was asked, if you could turn back the clock, what's the one thing you would change? And he said, in the 1989 grand final, I'd get Bruce Maguire to play the ball instead of him trying to tap it forward. Canberra got a penalty which cost us the title. How quick are the big five of that team to throw other people under the bus?
I know. Anyone but themselves. It's like they had 30 chances to win that game.
Yeah.
And Bruce Maguire's got to take the blame? Fair dinkum.
I thought that was a bit weak by Ciro.
Yeah, but also to publicly personally shame him. No good.
So yeah, unless you have any other thoughts on the Q&A, we'll move on. But
I used to love the Q&A.
Yeah.
I really loved it, and
I didn't realise that Home Improvement was garbage, and I didn't realise Tim Allen was a police informant and drug trafficker, yeah, I really enjoyed reading those, and I do remember those Contenders ones. That was the Halcyon days of League Week.
Yeah. So our next segment, we're going to stay in the nostalgia vibe just for a bit longer, and
well, for about a year, really,
and have a look at footy cards of the era. I thought '94 was one of the best years for footy cards.
Oh, there'll be some debate there. Check out our Twitter and Facebook.
For the pictures we're going to put up to go with this episode.
I had the full set for this year. It was probably the only year that I was that invested in collecting that I got the album and the full set.
You went the album. You didn't go the rubber band.
I really wish I had those cards.
I still got all of mine.
Yeah.
The only one I've really got full is the pink one, 88. For some reason I missed a few, and what I really liked about footy cards was the inevitable misprints.
Yeah.
Peter Tunks doesn't play for Cronulla. What's going on?
But those Scowlins ones with the bubblegum in the late 80s, I feel like Michael Speechley was in every packet I ever got.
Yeah, me too.
So there was an article in the Rugby League that week promoting the footy cards that said 78% of Australian kids at the time were collecting cards of some kind. So were you invested?
Oh, heavily, yeah. Loved it so much. I was just getting to the age when this was the last time I was going to do it.
Yeah.
I think I got some in 95, but the magic had worn off.
In 95, I got my first key card and blew my entire life savings on basketball cards in the space of a week.
You and your Beckett, Christ.
Yeah. But yeah, that was kind of the end of it. So,
but these ones were particularly special due to the legend.
Yeah. So there were a number of special sets within the dynamic marketing set that year. So you had your Try Machine ones with the purple lightning that I liked. Your Tenure players, some rookie cards.
They were great initiatives.
And yeah, the Legends card, they were so formative for me. Like, I remember seeing names like Dave Brown, Vic Hay, etc. that I had never heard of.
Yeah.
And it was like another world.
Well, that sort of shaped your interest in it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, it's not overstating it to say that those cards had a massive effect on the fact that we're sitting here today. That's
what they need to think about now, is like, how are they affecting 12-year-olds now? Are they looking after the history?
Yeah.
Which I think they are, but they could always do more.
The gold cards they had, which were really cool,
A mate of mine got the I don't know if this is the year, but he got the signed Mark Coyne one. The rare one.
Yeah.
Is it personally signed, or was it just like there's like 1,000 of them or something?
There was, it was a limited edition, but I don't know if they were personally signed.
There wasn't many of them, and he got one. And I kept saying, mate, that's going to be worth a fortune. I reckon you should sell that. And he refused to discuss any sort of selling of the Mark Coyne card.
But I'm glad you mentioned that, because I wanted to bring this up. Great card, great look. It hooked me. I bought those cards until I got all 5. So the 5 players chosen: Ricky Stewart, Steve Walters, Kerrod Walters, Mark Coyne, and Brad Mackay. Like, that's your 5?
Yeah. Without being disrespectful to Mark Coyne, he's been in some great moments, but he wasn't really in the top echelon.
No, but that's a kind of good segue to what I wanted to, because I wanted to touch on this in terms of Mark Coyne, because obviously I'm a Dragons fan, so I loved Mark Coyne, and even as a 13-year-old, I was questioning whether Mark Coyne and Brad Mackay were really the 2 gold cards I'd want.
Brad Mackay was a great player, but he was a backup to the greatest player.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. He was a great player. So was Coyne in his own way.
Would Coyne, as you quaintly described him, would he be a Blues origin centre in the era?
I think 94, like he would have vied with Mary. Like I don't think it was.
I think Mary's double the player.
I think he is too, but I think where they were in the game at that point, I think it would have been a discussion.
I'd rather have Gary Coyne in the centres.
So 94 was, of course, that famous Origin win for Queensland in the last minute. New South Wales did go on to win the series, which everyone forgets. But I was always, even though I was, diehard New South Wales fan, I was always so proud of Mark Coyne for scoring that try. And he had so much work to do to get over the line.
Well, let's talk about that try. Everyone knows the try. Oh my God, it's a miracle. What does Fatty say? Everyone knows the try, but the worst part for me was my hero, Ricky Stewart, really didn't put in it on the line to stop it. If he put his body on the line, he could have stopped it, I think. Jarred the ball with something like that. And he kind of just hung back and let it happen, and no one ever brings that up.
Yeah. That's got to be... Would you say like top 3 all-time Origin moment?
Definitely. I still think top 1.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's probably most repeated.
Well, it's better than the Lockyer last minute one because it had like 100 hands in it, and each part of that it could have broken down.
Yeah,
like it's sad to watch for a Blues fan, but it's just magic.
But as I said, we did go on to win the series. Game 2 was a triumph for the league. The first game at the MCG, getting 87,000 people there.
Would you say this was sort of the peak of the national origin? Like the early, when it went national?
Yeah, I think so. That was like probably the start or near the start of where like even people who didn't watch any other rugby league for the year knew about Origin and would tune in for novelty, if nothing else.
He was only 14 years old then. So it was still quite early, but I can remember late 80s being right into it. Buzz in the street sort of thing in Newcastle. But not anyone in Hawthorn was beating down the doors to watch it.
But yeah, John Quayle has, or had at the time, a photo of the crowd at the MCG framed on his wall. So it was this crowning achievement of rugby league at the time. Obviously left with a bit of a bitter aftertaste with everything that came, in the next year.
Also, it was one of the most awful-looking TV games because of the giant ground with these ants on the side trying to watch it.
The other thing is that with that Origin series, Wally Lewis, the coach of Queensland that year, was under a lot of pressure, both because of the on-field performance and some tension between him and some of the other Queensland figures involved. I always thought Fatty came out of nowhere in 95 and basically they picked him because there was literally no one left to pick. But in 94, he was considered the next in line.
Yeah, I mean, because of his goofiness on the Footy show, which I loved, but he wasn't respected for his football nous and heart as a tactician sort of thing. But the Blues had Rodonicus, for God's sakes. I mean, I think it's a fair choice.
Last thing before we move on from this little section is I wanted to briefly discuss the brands of footy jerseys in that era. You had 2 really, Peerless and Classic.
Yeah.
I just saw an article saying that St. George had got Peerless to make their jerseys. And I just felt this pang of like, because he didn't want to turn up to school in a peerless jersey. You know?
Well, everything was so higgledy-piggledy back then. Like, they couldn't have one manufacturer, one deal.
Yeah.
It's always like guys doing side deals.
Yeah.
Like, you know what I mean?
What I don't get, Dada Uniforms didn't supply the Panthers uniforms. Like, they were peerless jerseys. I'm like, maybe they just didn't make footy jerseys, but it just seems weird that you've got Dada Uniforms on your uniform that's made by another company.
Well, peerless are like, you know, if you want the best, you want jerseys that are going to hold 6 kilos of water, you come to us. If you want some thick gabardine / denim material for your jerseys, you come to us. Make sure that the sponsors things wear off immediately as well.
Yeah, that was always the thing, a peerless jersey with like a number 7 half off.
My Canberra milk jersey would look like garbage after like 3 wears. It was just like the milk was peeling off.
So I've just picked out a couple of stories for that year that caught my eye. The first of these was the year that Alan Jones took over as football manager at Souths after 3 middling years at best at Balmain, as we discussed on one of our early history corners. Despite his record at Balmain, there was a lot of trumpeting this as a coup for Souths. You know, they've done really well. You know, Sherlock said, you know, largely via the good offices of Jones, Souths will now get the $7 million loan they need to transform the ageing relic at Redfern into a supermodern leagues club. In the long view, the short-term linking of the influential Jones with Souths was a masterstroke. Bob McCarthy in his book said, even though Allen's 3-year stint at Balmain produced indifferent results, Souths believed Jones would attract sponsors from the top end of town as well as quality players.
Souths have been going for the White Knight for a long time, and finally with Rusty they got a good one.
But it's so funny that there's all this talk, this is a really smart move. You know, they brought in Alan Jones, he's going to get the sponsors, he'll get the money. And to be fair, he did some of that. He did bring some more money in. Player signings we'll get to, maybe questionable, but so it was a good idea in that respect, but was the only way to get him to hand over the keys to the football department.
Yeah, I know. I don't think he's the sort of guy who likes to say, I'll happily power share.
Yeah.
You know?
But it reminded me of when Cronulla secured their real estate deal a couple of years ago, and there was all this talk about, Cronulla, they've secured their future. They've, you know, this is great. They've really, you know, and it's like, if you can't do that with your primary, like, business, then is it, I think you had the analogy of it's like, you know, Shelley's soft drinks, you know, like becoming real estate moguls. And
Yeah, it's crazy. But like, what I don't get about this trumpeting of this signing was like, yes, he had the 87 World Cup stuff and he had the radio and everything like that, so he had a good name. But the Balmain results were diabolical.
Yeah.
Like, he had a decent chance there.
Yeah. I mean, it showed, and we do have an episode on Souths coming up later in the season, but it does show you the dire position that they were in, that this was basically their only way of survival.
They were lean times back then.
Mm.
Like, post 89, that was like, no good.
Mm. So let's talk about some of the quirks of Alan Jones, one of which was the disciplinary policy he brought in, which operated on a demerit point system. So if you accumulated 10 points, you get a $1,000 fine, and after 15 points, you had your contract reviewed, and different offences had different points lost, etc., which seemed like a good idea. But Neil Cadigan did the maths on it and found that, and this is a quote, a player would have to be sent off twice, miss training twice, be late 3 times, and miss 2 official functions before he'd have his contract reviewed.
Well, that might have been possible in Rugby League.
And then, of course, there's the Jones Inner Circle stuff that we talked about when he was at Balmain. And one of the first things he did was to get his old Balmain prodigy, Jason Sinclair, into the team. And there was a lot of talk about, you know, whether he was, you know, too close to him or giving him preferential treatment. Jones scoffed at that and said, Jason is just one of a number of players I brought with me from Balmain. He doesn't get special treatment. As soon as he's healthy, he'll be straight back in first grade. So no preferential treatment, but laying it out right there.
We talked about the tragic end of Jason Sinclair on our History Corner, but we also talked about the fact that Alan Jones really looked after him after his career. Yeah. Bought him a house, this sort of stuff. So there was obviously a close relationship there.
Yeah, absolutely. And this isn't really an attack on Alan Jones. I mean, I could do some of that off air, but he's a very litigious man. But yeah, obviously he's done a lot of good for, you know, quite a few people in rugby league. So
you're right, though. This inexplicable halo effect for him.
I think part of it was his Churchillian kind of presence in the dressing rooms. Bob McCarthy, who we're about to hear, it wasn't such a smooth relationship in the end, but he said, it's not only what he says, but how he says it. And they respond, mate, I respond to it so much that sometimes I feel like getting out there and playing.
I love Bob McCarthy.
And so when Jones joined the team in late 93, he was given $1 million to bring in some of those big name players that he was surely going to bring to the club. That's one of the reasons you get him, so they said, was he'd attract the big name players. South's 94 recruits: Jason Bell, Jamie Corcoran, John Elias, Brett Goldspink, Anthony Caberry, Mark McGaw, Tony Mestrov, Gene Namu, who played one game for them, so I don't know about that one. I don't remember him playing for
I remember
South.
him being a prodigy, though.
Yeah. He did well at Auckland for a while, but...
For a very short while.
Yeah. David Penner, Paul Quinn, Dean Skiffaliddi, Jason Sinclair, and Scott Tronk. So, not really a premiership caliber list of recruits. And that was going with a core of young players that were in the could-be-anything stage of their careers before they turned into could-have-beens. So Craig Field was, dominating at times that year.
I don't think you can blame him for Craig Field.
No, I'm not blaming him for any of these.
No, I'm just saying like as a centerpiece.
Yeah.
He was the man.
Yeah, absolutely. Darryl Trindle was showing signs that he could have gone on with it. And he had a long career.
Great player, tricky.
Yeah. Duncan McRae, who started well, then went to the Raras.
I remember when he went to Union, and that wasn't really done back then. It was people coming the other way. And I remember thinking, what's he thinking? And I remember thinking, what are they thinking? Yeah. So I think he did quite well.
He did all right there, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, Duncan McRae, it was like a bit of a, what's going on here?
He must have been about the first one, right?
Yeah, it was early.
Yeah.
And I wasn't that worried about it. It was but then I was thinking, that's peculiar.
That core of young juniors they had coming through, this was just after they lost the likes of Terry Hill, Jim Sedaris, Jim Dimmick. And the bleating from South's management and fans about losing their juniors, they act as if they've never bought a player and no other club has ever developed players. It's if you don't have the means to keep your juniors, well...
But also, they seem to think that this club, South Juniors, this despicable pokey den, right, is somehow some sort of monument to their young players in the area. Yeah. It's like... You're stealing from their families, like animals.
And so the Jones era did start well with that Challenge Cup win over Brisbane, which was written about as if it was this sporting miracle and, one of the great days in South Sydney, which looking back 25 years later, you're like, mate, it's a pre-season comp. But, it was still a thing at that point.
I was right into the pre-season comp. I would love it now.
Yeah. Well, this is one of my talking points, but just to set up the comp, it was... The final was played at Albury, and so games were taken all over the bush. I think they did it the next year, and same thing, playing...
Can I ask you a question? Was the game in the bush dying back then?
Always. I know that year or the year after they took a game to Cobar, so they were going all over the place, which is, that obviously built a lot of buzz and it worked well.
Are you aware that Nick Kosef comes from Cobar?
Really? So this was in the dying days of the pre-season cup, and one of the questions I wanted to ask you is, we've been long proponents of some kind of cup system in place, over the Origin period, but when you think about the history of rugby league in Australia, you have these cups that, going back to the 20s, there was the City Cup. You have these cup competitions that work for a while and then they don't. The Wills Cup, the Craven Cup, the Amco Cup, Panasonic Cup.
But you know why? Because in rugby league in Australia, you've got two types of football. Mickey Mouse and fair dinkum. And when people decide that the cup's not fair dinkum, it becomes Mickey Mouse, and it goes.
And as we spoke about a couple of months back about rugby league's inability to achieve cultural change, will a cup competition always have the stain of Mickey Mouse football? Is there any way we can actually have a cup competition that works?
I don't think so, because the premiership's so important, Origin's so important, that they're not going to risk their players. As soon as you're holding back the best players, it becomes Mickey Mouse.
Yeah. And that is a big problem. Ultimately, I really want it to work, and I think that's the best way of restructuring the season so Origin doesn't kill it for 12 weeks.
I don't think it'll ever come back pre-season. I think they're happy with, 20 interchanges and just not exerting the body too much for a long season, that type of thing.
Yeah.
If the season was 16 games, might be worthwhile. But
Yeah. But it's funny, I get South fans like giving me shit if they beat us at the Charity Shield. I'm like, it's a trial.
So that disappoints me that the Charity Shield's a joke now.
But it is.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Like, it used to be something.
Yeah.
Even the World Club Challenge is a joke now.
Yeah.
Which sucks.
Mm.
I still love the World Club Challenge.
But anyway, so I think that's my main point is, as much as I love the idea of a cup competition, when you look back on previous installments, it just seemed like you're destined to fail.
As a child, I loved the Panasonic Cup, but that was, guys training twice a week, and when you got these thoroughbreds on $1 million and a free boat, you can't be.
So it was a great victory for South, regardless, and was really going to set the tone for the season. That all came crashing down 1 week later when they were smashed by Newcastle in the opening round of the premiership and the debut of Andrew
I was there
Johns.
live on the drunk hill, not the dry hill, and he was phenomenal.
Do you remember any buzz about him before the game?
I remember people saying Matthew Johns' brother's playing. I'm like, no, Matthew Johns is awesome. Like, his brother might be good too.
Mm.
It's like, and there's this gun player. He's kicking all the goals and he's bumping people off with his hips and stuff and scoring close to the line. It was awesome.
Yeah,
he was scoring on my end.
So I think it was 23 points on debut. Wasn't it? 23 points.
I remember thinking, like, what a debut!
What a way to announce yourself, and then to go on with it.
Well, you know what I feel about memorable debuts. Fittler, Johns. This makes like when a near immortal or an immortal has those immortal debuts. Awesome.
Yeah, it did. Flatten the champagne at South, and it was a reality check. But the season wasn't a complete disaster, and they did finish ahead of Newcastle on the ladder eventually. But just, I wanted a little aside on Newcastle. One article that I saw was talking about Newcastle media that year, which featured players heavily on the radio, on the TV. They were all over it. One of my favourite was on New FM Saturday morning. Waity and the Chief, David Waite and Paul Harrigan, had a show together.
I don't remember that. That's hilarious.
So you had Mark Glanville calling the news on a rival radio station. Mark Sargent was a sports reporter on Prime Television.
Mark Sargent and Matthew Rodwell had an ad for, I think it was McDonald's. Might have been Henny Penny. For some reason I think it's McDonald's, but it was so cheesy. Matthew Rodwell goes, what are you having, Sarge? He goes, I'll have everything.
It reminds me a lot of, because my mum lives on the south coast, so I was exposed to a lot of the Illawarra media. And
Win TV.
Win TV, yeah. And any radio commercial that didn't feature Rod Wishart and Paul McGregor wasn't worth the time.
But going back to that era of television, in my house,
we got the Sydney channels. We had a big antenna. But my nan's house, they got Prime and NRTV and all the Newcastle versions. So sometimes there'd be different things on. It'd be like, they got some others do have them on Channel 10, but they got Porridge on NRTV. It'd be like, awesome. And then occasionally the football wouldn't be played on the NBN 9.
Yeah, I did the exact same thing because, like, my uncle who lived in Clovelly but somehow had some satellite hookup or whatever, so we could go and watch the Win broadcast of the footy that wasn't on in Sydney.
What about that? Excluding people from a major city watching their television.
Well, maybe that's the only way we can get people back to games.
That wouldn't help.
Yeah, it wouldn't. That would just kill rugby. But yeah, so that was just a little aside. Back to South and Bob McCarthy arriving as a coach at South, leaving his job as a Lakemba car salesman for the opportunity.
Would you let her buy a car from Bob McCarthy? I think I would.
Yeah.
I think he'd be fair dinkum.
Yeah, I think so too.
Mate, I'm going to tell you, they've got a few miles on the clock, but it won't let you down, you know?
Did you know in the 60s, the Stax car dealership was a regular employer of footy players? So at one dealership you had Rex Mossop and Ian Walsh, both there competing to be Salesman of the Month. So,
how many times do you reckon they rolled the sleeves up over that?
Do you reckon there'd be brawls in there?
This is my commission, mate.
So McCarthy arrived at South and I'll read this from the 3rd of August 1993 in the Sydney Morning Herald. South's Chief Executive Terry Parker emphasised that Jones would have the ultimate say in the running of the team, including selections. It's got to be made perfectly clear to everyone publicly that Alan Jones is the boss of that area, Parker said. So fairly explicit then. You'd think that McCarthy was coming in knowing that it was Alan Jones's show and, you know, he was there to guide the players around, but ultimately he'd have to defer to Jones. And McCarthy agreed with that, saying, he gave me the job on condition that if I didn't get along with Jones, I would have to be the one to walk away. I agree because I didn't think Alan would interfere in the day-to-day coaching of the team. And then in that same Sydney Morning Herald article, Bob McCarthy was asked how he thought that dynamic would work, and knowing that Jones has say over selections and everything, and that's the deal, and he said, I haven't seen Alan as yet. We'll get together in the next couple of days, but we'll most probably bounce ideas off each other, something like Mark Murray and Jack Gibson at East. I don't know how he handles the football part of it, but I'm pretty sure he'd play off my experience. And asked how selections and tactics would go, McCarthy said, oh, that'd be mine. I'm pretty sure common sense would say that he'd leave it to me. But if he offered something, I'd quite listen to him to a certain extent.
But this is funny, because now this is de rigueur for Rugby League having a coaching director, or a general manager now. Back then it was kind of out of the ordinary.
But still, even now, when your director of football was rocking up to training, handing the coach the team list.
Yeah.
I don't think that would even go down now.
No, but also, there's always infighting now.
Yeah.
Rugby League's always been a one-cook kitchen.
Yeah.
But they always want to have multiple cooks.
Yeah. So it quickly fell apart at South, not helped by the fact that Ken Shine, who was brought in as an assistant, was another one of Jones's boys and basically was given the running of the team on Jones's orders, and McCarthy was, shunted to being little more than a figurehead. On
Ken Shine, he had a good run there, right, for a sort of meteoric rise. But I never heard him described as anything but Kenny Shine.
Yeah,
it's kind of disrespectful when they call the first grade coach. Like, I heard Gus refer to Tim Sheens in the grand final of '94, Timmy Sheens.
Yeah,
it's like, I don't know.
But I guess Gus had Penrith connection and.
But I always thought that was kind of disrespectful.
Yeah.
Kenny Shine is doing a good job at South.
So it very quickly fell apart. Like when Alan Jones brought Jason Sinclair in early in the year as a signing, the first Bob McCarthy heard of it was during an interview when he was asked about the signing.
I just get the impression with him, it's a bit of Trump in there. It's like, why would I tell anyone what I'm doing? It's obviously the right thing, sort of thing. It's like just no tact at all.
Yeah.
And then Bob McCarthy's not a guy to be treated tactlessly.
Yeah. But when stories were coming out that the whole thing was unraveling and there was this inner turmoil going on, Bob McCarthy was asked about it, and he said, "What's the big deal? We have a hunch where these rumours may have started, but no idea why this bloke would have a vendetta against me, Souths, or Jonesy." Just the audacity of Rugby League guys to deny so vehemently that they can't just say, like, no, that's not incorrect. They're like, I don't know who's starting this, but...
they demonise journalists, right, for reporting what's actually happening all the time.
And McCarthy eventually left, blaming it on the hip replacement he needed. Which even at the time was viewed in hysterical terms.
I've heard of fake injuries for players leaving, but like coaches.
So that was basically how the South story ended that year. So as I said, they finished ninth, not a complete train wreck, but the promise of better days from Alan Jones didn't really pan out.
Well, that was a cattle problem. You just read the squad out.
Yeah, but he was brought in.
Yeah, I know,
because he'd attract.
But I mean, like that could never compete with the top sides.
No, yeah.
On Bob McCarthy, though, what I love about him is he's still active in the game. He's not lost to the game, that's for sure. But, he's always at the mental league stuff. He's always at the centenary test. He's at this. He's doing. He's despite being treated quite shabbily in various roles, Gold Coast franchise, etc. But he's still loves the game and he still gets involved.
Yeah, absolutely.
And still respected across the board.
Yeah. So we'll move on to the new clubs, which was the other big talking point across the year. A lot of coverage, column space given to who was signing who, logo designs, jersey designs, all that sort of stuff. We'll start with the Crushers, which both the Cowboys and Crushers utter train wreck of squads.
Yeah,
the Crushers was very, very weird in that it was QRL backed. So on our Broncos episode, we talked about how that being a possibility for the Broncos and us both saying that it wouldn't work. I wasn't aware at the time that the Crushers actually were, backed by the QRL.
Well, they shouldn't be bragging about that.
No, and exactly all the concerns we discussed is basically how it played out. Very early in the piece, there was talk that money from the the QRL for Origin feeding into the Crushers and vice versa, and the potential of conflict of interest. And John Quayle said, yep, we're watching this, we're on top of it. That's not going to happen. He said, quite clearly, we've got to know where the Crushers' money comes from. QRL money is to develop league in the state, not to be spent on one team. It would be like us, the New South Wales Rugby League, having our own team. I can't see it happening. So, why was it allowed to happen? And I know you've got like QRL, CRL, BRL, like all these RLs to, have their say, but how is that acceptable?
I don't know. Just imagine the people involved in it, like Queensland Rugby League administrators. Think about that.
And then not only the QRL conflict of interest, but as always, there has to be some kind of sponsorship conflict of interest. So
let me ask you this: Is sponsorship conflict of interest even worse in Queensland?
It seems to be, yeah. Most of the dramas seem to stem from there.
I mean, there hasn't been a Queensland Rugby League sponsorship that hasn't had a drama.
No.
In living memory.
Going to aforementioned State of Origin coach Wally Lewis that year, who was in danger of losing his job because he'd done some unauthorised promo with Powers Bidder, despite 4X being the Queensland sponsor. To which he said, if it came to the crunch and I was forced to make a decision, I would have stood by Powers. I don't get paid 1 cent to coach the Queensland side, and Powers have always been terrific to me.
What?
Yeah.
He coached for free?
Free, yeah.
That's insane.
Yeah. Well, this is the era of administrators who thought that it was a privilege to play for Australia. You shouldn't get paid for it,
Well, I think it's very admirable, but I mean, Jesus.
I don't think it's admirable at all.
No, like their attitude towards it, but it was like they're selling out the stadium and they're selling giant TV ratings.
Yeah.
Christ.
But so the Crushers had to drop Pepsi as their major sponsor because Lang Park had an exclusive deal with Coca-Cola.
I'm so sick of this sort of stuff.
And this is the same year where Manly, the Pepsi Manly Sea Eagles won the Coca-Cola World Sevens and had to be stopped from going on stage holding cans of Pepsi, which you have to think, though, that Manly team would have been absolute dickheads about it. Like, can you imagine Terry Hill with a can of Pepsi?
It tastes good after some stolen lobsters. But I mean, just on these corporate fights, like if a corporate fight like that, soft drink company, beer company said, you know what, we don't care if they do something with the opposition for one little thing because we're not childish idiots.
Yeah,
I'm going to buy their product because that's really reasonable.
Because you got to think these kind of conflict of interest must come up in sport all the time.
Well, when they have to cover their Nike headband and stuff like that, it's like just let. It's obvious what they are, and then you bring more attention to it by bringing it up.
Yeah, so stupid. But so it was a struggle from the start on field and off for the Crushers. They were playing in the Brisbane comp that year in '94. Went all right, didn't set the world on fire. Off field, trying to. That's
got to be a bad omen. Not setting the world on fire in the Brisbane comp.
The signing situation was a real struggle from the start. They got Bob Lindner early in the piece. But as of July 1994, in addition to Lindner, the key signings they were celebrating in the media was Craig McDermott and Trevor Hendy, who'd signed on to be official ambassadors of the clubs. Speaking
of the dangers and to rugby league in the era, Iron Man.
That's so fun, and we've got more Iron Man content coming on through the year, but it baffles. And I was there watching Iron Man every Saturday morning.
I loved it. Yeah.
It baffles me that Iron Man was such a big thing.
I mean, they were household names. I mean, I was a Guy Leach man.
I was the Mercer brothers personally.
But I think the Halcyon days of Iron Man was 92 to 94.
Yeah, about that. Yeah. So in 94, Trevor Hendy was a massive get by the Crushers.
He was. Yeah.
Alan Jones level going to bring the big names in if you got Trevor Hendy.
But let's talk about the squads, right? If there's nothing more true in 108 years of rugby league, whatever we've done, it's if you have a bad squad in your first year, you are on a hiding to nothing to keep the club alive. Yeah.
And when that aforementioned first signing, Bob Lindner, signs as a player early 94, by the end of the year, he was announced as their non-playing coach.
Yeah.
How bad are you doing?
Well, he was at the end of his career. He played hard his whole life, so they get a guy broken down, which is what all these clubs do.
And he did sign with the intention of, he'd dipped his toes into coaching in England. He clearly wanted to be a coach. So
I'm saying that he was a test player killing it in 94.
Yeah.
But
so it's not like he was. I mean, he didn't really work out as a first grade coach, but it's not like it was, an unmitigated disaster or something that came from nowhere. There was always the possibility of him ending up as coach there, but it just kind of speaks of how bad they were doing when their marquee signing ends up their non-playing coach.
So you're telling me that Garrick Morgan didn't shoulder the brunt of the workload, or?
So let's have a look at that squad. So Mario Fennick, their big name signing,
I think that's a good end of the career signing.
Yeah,
a real effort guy, a team guy.
And so he wasn't thrilled about having to go up there. He desperately wanted to stay at North.
He was saying it in the media. It's like, mate, take the money, but don't whinge about it. Like,
he was talking about how hard it was to travel around Brisbane because he didn't know the place. He was like, I know Sydney really well. Crushes, administrators getting calls at 3 in the afternoon. I'm lost. But so Dale Shearer, another good end of career signing. St John Ellis. I remember when they brought all those new blokes onto the Footy show, and Fatty was like, "Your name's St John. What's to go there?"
I still think about that at least once a month. It's like, it still confounds me. Who would name their kid that? Why it says St John?
Yeah.
It's bizarre.
It is.
But I remember I was big into the English League there, particularly for the 94 Kangaroo Tour. Got right into it, started buying Open Rugby magazine. Right, that means Rugby League. It wasn't the Devil's work, but and he was like a big star over there. He was killing it. And I thought, this is going to be a great signing. Wrong.
So Chris McKenna, Wayne Collins,
Chris McKenna was a good signing.
Yeah, that was a good signing. Trevor Gilmeister, another. So they had some good guys there. It was just, you've got four blokes trying to prop up a pretty poor squad otherwise. But when Garrick Morgan hailed as this huge signing, he couldn't even make their best run on squad when they were putting the likely team together.
$500,000. That was big money back then.
Yeah,
this is pre-Super League.
And then the classic rugby league thing of players signing letters of intent, but they're not going on to sign the contract. So Darren Smith was originally going to go up and play there.
So he could have really helped them. Peak Darren Smith.
And the Cowboys, when I look at this Cowboys squad, so the likely lineup that was in the Rugby League week in December 94, Willie Morganson, John Scarden, Paul Morris, Adrian Vowles, David Bouveng, Noel Solomon, Jason Martin, Martin Bella, Dean Skifflety, Bruce Sinclair, Wayne Singh, George Bartlett, etc. There's some names sprinkled in there, but when I read that list, it reminded me of, video games in the 90s when they couldn't get the rights to the real player names.
But what jumps out at me in that squad is Jason Martin, because he was supposed to be something. Meanwhile, he's playing bloody his finger picking acoustic and didn't go on with it. So it's like, that's not really their fault.
It was a really revealing article he did in that same Rugby League Week special on the Cowboys when he talked about the loss of desire. So he went up to Newcastle, was understudy to Matthew Rodwell and then Andrew Johns. He played about a dozen games in 2 years there.
We had 3 top flight halfbacks at Newcastle.
Yeah. But so this is what he said. I reckon I got about 10 games in first grade in my 2 seasons with the club. But to be honest, I didn't mind playing second grade. I liked the coach, I liked the players, and I liked helping the younger blokes out. I didn't miss the pressure. I was cruising and I was happy to do that. And then he went on to say that now he's got the fire in his belly back, but I don't think he did.
Fire in the bank account.
Martin Bella was another one who, he was washed up by then, but it's a hometown boy coming home and,
I always loved Martin Bella.
Yeah.
I really loved him. He was a character and a villain to Geyer.
Yeah. I love him even more after reading this comment. This is in the school of Wally Lewis reading Phantom comics and going, how does he do it? So Martin Bella was talking about his love of foot rot flats. So this was also in a Rugby League week. When Bella talks about foot rot flats, he marvels at the genius of cartoonist Murray Bell and the way he characterises the nameless dog. People from the country know that border collies are harder workers on a property than a cattle dog, but they don't have the fearless nature. They tend to hold back a bit, said Bella. Bell portrays this well in his comic strips.
He was actually known as a bit of an intellect, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Against the look and the trope of the prop.
Yeah.
That's what a hilarious comment.
Yeah.
He's going deep into the foot rot flats writing process.
But why was it so hard for these clubs to get players to sign?
I just think back then, like, North Queensland felt like another planet for Sydney people.
Yeah.
Now it's like, go up there, it'd be great, hometown team. I mean, you could see it was going to be Newcastle long term, but at that era, it was like, they're going to get flogged.
Yeah. And then the Crushers, I think, being in Brisbane, but not at the Broncos.
We've discussed this off air. We've discussed this on air. I don't understand why there has to be a second Brisbane team. Like, why can't there be like a second, third? Why can't there be an extra Queensland team? Like, Brisbane Broncos are never going to be challenged.
I don't know. And
Hunter Mariners, like,
this is something you and the listeners will get used to hearing. But we've got more discussion on this coming up throughout the year. But one thing I think of is if the Crushers launched in 95, that's only 7 years after the Broncos. If they were given a chance to cement their place in the landscape, like, who's to say they wouldn't have had some Cowboys style growth and have become a real...
They could have got a following, but you're always going to be like, it's like the Clippers.
Yeah.
The Clippers have got a following in LA, but they're not the Lakers.
But now, Kawhi Leonard's going there, they're getting like...
Way to date the podcast. But I don't know, if we're going to be looking towards a proper professional national comp, we should be looking at having one team per city, not several. Yeah. My view.
Yeah, a lot of points on both sides of that argument, but what I come down to is you had this really strong Brisbane comp for so many years. Surely that fan base could sustain a second club, given the...
All right, I'll concede all those points. Ipswich, just do it a bit away.
Yeah.
So Brisbane's got their cachet still.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I do know, but
yeah,
I don't know if I'm right.
Yeah. Anyway, we do have some more discussion of this point and the fate of the Cowboys and Crushers to come later in the season. So we'll leave the Crushers and the Cowboys talk there. When we talk about the Warriors and the Reds, the media coverage of those two squads in that year was dominated by two key signings, one at each club. And the reason they were being talked about was because of one of the most tragic events in rugby league history that took place on the 21st of June, 1992. And that was the tragic death of Ben Alexander in a car accident. This is a really difficult thing for us to talk about, but it's hard to get away from the impact that this one moment of madness had on not only that club, but in some ways what happened with the rest of rugby league over the next 2 or 3 years.
We discussed this off air, in our personal lives, and it's never really been addressed publicly in detail, has it? Because it's just too tragic. You hear a story here, a story there, a whisper here, a whisper there, but no one wants to talk about it. Why would you? But
and for good reason, and that's why this is such a difficult thing, but something I think we need to do. Just on a personal note, like, this was a really formative event for me. Like, I was 11. It's not like I didn't know about death, but the idea that, like, a footy player could die, that was... Like,
yeah, I was 12 as well. It knocked me for 6. It's just after the 91 grand final. I still remember where I was when I was told.
Yeah.
I was on a school bus, a double-decker 1950s-style school bus, and a Penrith fan who had been imported with her family, named Kerry Ann, old school friend. She looked real down, and I'm like, what's wrong with you? I hadn't heard about it. She said, Ben Alexander's died. I'm like, what? And it blew me away.
I still remember all the news reports so clearly. Wide World of Sports did a tribute where they used Dire Straits' Brothers in Arms over footage of especially Ben and Greg together to this day, I can't hear those guitar notes without thinking about what happened. So, to press on, Ben Alexander, with all of his Panthers teammates, was at the club. After all three grades had a win, they were getting their, jerseys presented as 1991 champions. Later in the evening, he, with a couple of other players, decided to leave to head to Temptations nightclub. Was almost 3 times over the limit, not wearing a seatbelt, ran a red light, and died almost instantly on the scene. Across town, Brad Fittler was in camp with the Kangaroos. They were partying it up in an eastern suburbs nightclub. In the early hours of the 22nd of June, Mal Meninga came up to him holding a schooner and told him the news. Brad Fittler basically spent the rest of the evening sitting alone in the corner of that nightclub bawling. Panthers, when word got back to everyone at the club of what had happened, people were crying openly. The club closed early. Mark Geyer was actually at home in the Alexander's household. Of course, he was then dating, now married to Greg and Ben's sister Megan, was woken by a horrific scream and instantly knew that something tragic had happened. The next day, it proceeded to fall out as word got out. Instant shrines being put up at the accident site. Penrith in complete mourning. There were about 5,000 people who attended the church and surrounds for the funeral. And it very quickly caused that club to spiral out of control, which is understandable. It started well on the field. They, backed up for a win the following weekend, which you would have expected them to do, really.
It's any loss of a player is going to be tragic, but the fact that it was a guy on the rise, on the bench in the grand final, good judges across the board are saying this guy's going to be something. The brother of the guy that is something, the linchpin and king of Penrith. It's just the club was going to implode no matter what.
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to see any other outcome other than what happened. But as I said, they won their first game. Greg Alexander, Mark Geyer weren't involved, but they all got up for it. But quite quickly on the field, it all started falling apart. In one game, shortly after, Steve Carter came off the field and basically announced that he was retiring instantly. It was that hard to deal with.
Yeah.
Brandy was gone for most of that year. Others, like Brad Fittler, his way of dealing was to just play through it and, played some great football while dealing with it.
It's worth noting how close that club was. They're out there in Penrith, a lot of local juniors, siege mentality.
And at that point, Penrith had the vibe of a big country town, which was always hailed as, one of the key strengths of the club and the culture. But in the aftermath of this unspeakable tragedy, quickly became something oppressive for some of the players in that environment, like Glenn Lydiard, who was in the car and survived with some, minor injuries, spoke of that as of how hard it was to deal with his own personal feelings with that kind of fishbowl environment at Penrith.
But on top of all that, they got the close relationships with the siege mentality, the local juniors. There's a lot of brothers in there, Lydiards, Izzards, Goodwins.
Yeah, exactly. It was actually Craig Izzard who was a policeman at the time who actually went to the Alexanders to break the news to them. And things fell apart remarkably quickly. Players like Brandy, like MG, some of the other key players in that team basically spent the next 2 weeks living at a bonfire on a property in Penrith, just, drinking and trying to console each other as best they could. The funeral suits that the pallbearers, including Brandy, MG, Brad Fittler and Glenn Lydiard, they burnt them with the idea that no one else, they were hired suits, burnt them with the idea that no one else should wear them.
See, that always struck me as, this is a tragedy, but that's a business. You're burning their suits, but
exactly. And the hire company actually had to chase the club, and the club had to pay them out to avoid a small claims dispute.
All right, let's we're doing this respectfully, given the nature of it, but that's getting towards deliverance country sort of stuff, sitting by the bonfire for 2 weeks.
When I was reading about the bonfire, reading about the suits, my first thought was like where are the adults here?
Yeah.
You know, like
they were kids.
I
Most
understand
of them.
like how hard it is, and especially the Alexander family had been a rock for so many of those players, like for MG, for Freddie. Suddenly they're, you know, not in a position to offer that support. And it just seems there was a real like gap of some maturity that could have led them all through it.
Well, I mean, I think it's a very, very good point. We're talking about guys in the administration, but what can you do in a situation like that? I don't think you can really blame. I don't think, even if there was maturity there, you're not going to control these guys there.
There's no blame here.
Yeah.
I don't think anyone in the game, especially at that time, with the culture of the game at the time, could possibly have been expected to be equipped with those skills. Even now, like something like this, how do you get through it?
Well, I do remember that one of the footy cards, this knocked me around when I was a kid, was Jeff Selby, St George player, died tragically in a car accident as well. And I'm thinking, God, that's awful, but it wasn't like a big name, so it didn't sort of get that much coverage. But this one, it was the family name, it was the prince.
And what this event did was expose a culture that already had some serious issues. And again, part of this is game wide. You know, when Gus came in 1990, like he was 32 years old. You know, obviously he had huge success as a coach and was well regarded. And this, again, this isn't assigning any blame of Gus for this, but, you know, MG talks about how the players would come round to Gus's place and they'd all, you know, get on the drink, Gus included. And, you know, MG spoke of Gus as like a big brother.
We are both on record for not being fond of Gus's megalomania in the current game, but back then he was a beloved figure.
Yeah.
And that culture was game-wide. Up to and including Ken Otherson.
Yeah.
Right? So there's definitely no blame there.
No. And certainly with MG, there were signs that he was on a path already. You know, he'd been suspended early in that season for marijuana use, which, I mean, say you want what you want about the severity of that as an offence, it was still a sign that maybe he wasn't taking his career as professionally as he could have been.
Yeah.
Then you had a clique, two rival cliques that were already forming in the club, becoming really apparent as the inevitable blame game started with, you know, Gus chief among the target for people who were looking for someone to blame. He dropped Ben Alexander a few weeks before, partly because of some attitude issues and an inability to really take his career seriously. And that led to people blaming Gus, saying if Gus didn't do that, Ben wouldn't have left the club. And all
it's the most absurd thing I've ever heard in my life.
And yeah, everyone involved who held those views, like Mark Geyer said that at the time he thought about, you know, driving to Gus's house to get vengeance, you know, and obviously he's since realised how...
Christ almighty. I mean, talking about not thinking straight.
Yeah. Horrific stories about Gus trying to make peace with the Alexander family and, you know, that ending poorly.
You can't blame the... Well, you can blame the family, I suppose, but, like, it's understandable.
Yeah, and that's what Gus came out and said, you know, I would never... I understand it and accept it completely. You know, it was a bad situation, but I wasn't going to stand there and, you know, argue with the Alexander family.
Yeah. I think he actually handled that as well as it possibly could be handled, looking back.
Yeah.
Basically how he was feeling.
Yeah,
like,
exactly. And to this day, he said that is the worst thing that's ever happened to him, certainly in rugby league terms, if not, you know, in his life as a whole. But
that's interesting. The worst thing that's happened to me is his commentary, but...
So, yeah, there were already cracks appearing in that relationship. Like, MG and Gus were barely on speaking terms before the accident, which led to it getting even worse. Gus and the Alexander family had already started to fall out over a investment deal where Gus had invested some money into a trophy business that Greg's stepfather was set up, and as it was starting to fail, Gus was looking at being, you know, in the hole a substantial amount. So to try to get out of that deal, like, caused some acrimony. You had, going back to 1990, John Cartwright and Brandy not talking for most of the year, falling out over some girl. and so these two camps in the club were already emerging. Something like this happens and it just spirals completely.
There's a point here about professional relationships as well. Do you need to be investing in your players' stepfather's trophy business? Like in a modern game, that wouldn't be happening.
No, but again, it shows you the nature of Gus and his relationship with his players.
Absolutely.
That can't be forgotten. Like how much of a players' coach he was.
Yeah, absolutely.
At his peak. So it did lead to him eventually leaving the Panthers halfway through '94. And he said at the time or shortly after that he basically wanted to leave the place, from the moment the accident happened. And if you look at that core squad, Freddie, Gus, MG, Brandy, they all had to leave to, grapple with it. And I think that goes back to that, country town kind of mentality.
It's one of those things when it's inevitable what's going to happen. It's going to implode. You can't just dismantle the squad the day after this tragedy. You've got to sort of let it play out. It had to happen, sort of.
Yeah. So that tragic event, I said that the kind of seismic event it had on rugby league. Just look at that if you want to look in cold in terms of changing the fortunes of clubs. Gus leaves, goes to the Roosters, takes Freddie with him a couple of years after. That club instantly transformed. I know you don't like to give Gus too much credit for 2002. You're firm in the belief that it was Ricky Stewart's comp, but I mean...
there's word that that was heavily Gus's influence.
Yeah, but I mean, regardless of who was coaching that team, the effect Gus had on changing the fortunes of that team. They had no identity in the early 90s.
Absolutely. He gets 100% credit for it. And we'll talk about it throughout this 94 year. He was a great personality and a great coach and a great beloved figure in the game in 94. He
was the players' choice in the Rugby League Week players poll. He was voted the best coach by some distance. So he had 36%, Tim Sheen's 19%, Wayne Bennett 15%, Bozo 11%. Then you had Peter Louis, Chris Anderson bringing up the rear. So that was where he was at in 1994. 2 comps by the age of 34.
Yeah,
as
insane.
A coach.
Insane. Good coach.
But of course, Gus wasn't the first to leave. That was MG, and it's crazy to think that he was sacked from the Panthers little more than 2 weeks after the accident.
Yeah,
which speaks partly from what I said about the path he was already on. He was quite out of control even without the death.
I remember him talking about his career and how he regrets not pulling his head in a bit and
2 weeks. This is what I'm talking about, the rugby league culture at the time. It seems insane to me that the senior figures at the club couldn't have somehow said, why don't you go away for a while? Your head's not in this. You're not in a fit state to be playing rugby league or thinking about rugby league. Instead, he'd miss training and he'd, get in trouble for it. They'd set up a meeting. He'd miss the meeting.
Well, I mean, for 2 weeks after the death of your best friend, I mean, where's the compassion on that? But also, maybe this, I'm going to go around and get vengeance talk got back to...
Yeah. And so obviously there was already some tension there. But you mentioned the lack of compassion. So MG attended a meeting finally with Don Feltus, the Panthers boss, where it was pretty likely that he was going to get the sack whatever happened. But Feltus allowed Geyer to kind of unload and say he wanted out. And this is from Phil Gould's book, which came out in 95, I think. So, I don't know. Take it as you want. Maybe it's slanted one way, but it was saying that... So Feltus, when Geyer said he wanted out, Feltus brought out Geyer's contract and invited him to tear it up, which Geyer did, therefore resigning, not getting sacked, and costing himself thousands and thousands of dollars in the process. And Gould's book, which was written by Ray Chesterton, said, friends say Feltus still has the 8 pieces of the contract. If that's true, how callous and heartless is that?
I've got to say, I think there must be much more to the Geyer story than we know about, because who's going to do that to someone who's a star player who lost their best friend 2 weeks after, unless he's a massive nightmare? Yeah,
well, that's funny, because in all of Geyer's recollections of the time, he is quite contrite, and is very introspective about where he was at mentally. So there doesn't seem to be any malice coming from Geyer about it.
Let's put it on record that we're both massive Mark Geyer fans.
Absolutely, yeah.
And talk about a inverse Gus trajectory in personality. Like, he's become a gentleman and a beloved figure in rugby league.
So he leaves the Panthers, ends up at Balmain, which almost from the start was a terrible fit. Mainly for those same reasons. He wasn't right to be playing rugby league. He needed a bigger break, and he probably needed to get out of Sydney when he did re-sign, because he said at the time he'd drive from Penrith to Balmain and drive past Penrith Stadium and just think, what am I doing? Why am I going to this club? The relationship between him and Gould deteriorated further when he didn't make the 92 squad, and he was picked for the City team and ended up being sacked from it for being late to a training session.
That's not the classic line from Gould with the altercation in the dressing room, is it?
Yeah.
When they get face to face, and then the guy threatens to smash him, and he goes, "Well, don't let fear hold you back."
Yeah, that was that one.
That says to me that Phil Gould is not a pussy.
Yeah.
Because if that guy's standing in front of you in that era, God almighty, God help you.
So that, further eroded the already terrible relationship between the two of them at the time. Geyer, soldiered on through 93, but by early 94, it was clear that Balmain wasn't working out. Wayne Pearce was there at coach at the time and was doing his best to get Geyer into counselling and, make this relationship work. And at the time, in early 94, Geyer spoke positively about it. I'll read this. "I just want to calm down now and not be so volatile, so snappy. I've noticed myself. I'm driving the car and I want to punch out the guy in the car next to me. It's just not on." "You can't go around thinking like that all the time. Obviously something's troubling me outside of football and my family. It might be that I have a problem deep-rooted inside me. A counsellor might be able to bring it out of me. Until I speak to one, I might never find out." So
this is a good example of just humanity where, former criminal lawyer, so you meet a lot of troubled kids, and like the anger inside people, particularly young people, they can make a wrong turn and get chucked in jail, or Mark Geyer throws his career away, blah, blah, blah. But then you see Geyer, he's an adult now, and he's a kind, happy man, and he's grown as a person. And, there's so many kids like this at that age can go the other way.
Yeah.
He's just lucky.
Yeah, very, very lucky. And, obviously he's well aware of that with the way he speaks now. So he tried to make it work in Balmain, but I think those, mental struggles, he wasn't able to overcome them at Balmain. In the meantime, he'd already signed at the Reds for 95, but he was out at Balmain. So what he was going to do with 1994, well, that was all up in the air. So
what he did do with it blew my head off.
We'll get to that, but before we end up in Umina, let's talk about that Reds deal, because when everything was hitting the fan at Balmain, suddenly the Reds marquee signing was looking like a complete train wreck. They, openly soured on the deal in the press, if not in the actual, still getting him to come across. And at the same time, Mark Geyer was suddenly having thoughts about whether he wanted to be there.
It should be called the gymnastics expansion, all the backflips.
But think about this. So they lured Mark Geyer. They got Brad Mackay. I think they did so well with their signings.
Jimmy Grant.
Yeah. So, they did well with both youth and experience, like getting Matthew Rodwell, great signing.
Yeah.
Rodney Howe, like that astute buy, a young player. And obviously Brad Mackay and Mark Geyer were the two big tentpole signings. I wanted to talk about Brad Mackay for a moment, just to show you how far removed from today 1994 really was. When he was talking about the decision to sign there, he was, he went over to Perth basically just, as out of curiosity, not thinking that he ever would actually sign. And one of those reasons was the flight. And Brad Mackay said, "I immediately thought how awful it would be to fly all that way every 2 weeks. I have trouble sitting still for 15 minutes at home. The flight really surprised me. Not long after we took off, they showed a movie. Joanne and I love going to the movies, and before I knew it, I felt really comfortable. The movie finished and it's 2.5 hours into the flight, and I'm feeling really relaxed. Then they showed a couple of episodes of Cheers, and when we arrived, I felt really fresh."
It was small world back then, wasn't it? Fair nickel.
But he did go over, so did Mark Geyer. They actually, in 1992, when they were still the Perth Pumas, they were close to announcing Peter Sterling as their inaugural coach.
That's amazing.
Mm.
That's the age-old rugby league trope discussed in the Brisbane Broncos expansion history corner of naming bids early, pre-license.
I think the Reds is better.
Yeah, I think the Reds really suits. It's such a shame that they had to go because, A, they did well in their first year, good crowds, etc. But what a fortress that would be when these rugby league teams have got to fly 5 hours each way to get in there.
Yeah.
Like, it would really upset their apple cart.
I mean, watch all the episodes of Cheers you want. Like, after a while, that's going to... So in all the toing and froing over whether MG was going to end up in Perth, whether they still wanted him...
They must have been worried with good reason.
Yeah, but there was actually a very real chance of his return to the Panthers. And that all came of a meeting with Gus at a pub where they sat down and worked everything out and managed to settle all their differences. This was actually really touching from Gus, so I'll just read this. Sometime later, when Mark was cut from Balmain, I worked very hard to get him back to Penrith. He and I and our manager Wayne Beavis went to lunch at one stage, and it was one of the funniest afternoons I've ever had. Mark and I swapped stories and recollections of all the lies and excuses he had used on me to get out of training sessions. Mark is a difficult person for people to understand. I've formed the opinion that Mark enjoys living the life of a footballer, but he does not want to be one. He's a great bloke.
It's a good comment.
So they sorted out their differences, as I said, almost paving the way for a return to Panthers. The Panthers board were keen to get him back. Obviously, he was still at his best, a devastating forward for the opposition to deal with.
Interesting sliding doors moment here to quite a rugby league trope, but if he doesn't go to Perth, where's Matt Guy's career?
Yeah, very interesting because Matt went on a whim over to Perth with Mark.
It's hard to know if they would have loved him at Penrith.
Yeah.
So
in the end, they couldn't get the deal done because they said, we'll have you back, but it's up to you to get out of your Reds deal. We're not going to sign you for this year just so you can be fresh for the Reds in 95. So get out of your Reds deal and then you can come play with us. And it just couldn't be worked out.
How could it not be worked out? This is rugby league. Just a hint of homesickness could have got him out of it.
I kind of think that it was a subconscious thing where he knew that he still had to go.
Yeah, I'm so glad he went.
Yeah.
Because it seems to have transformed him.
Mm. But in the meantime, what was he going to do in 94? Again, a few clubs were interested in signing him, but balked at the prospect of signing him for that year. But interestingly enough, the Raiders expressed interest, knowing that it would only be for the year.
I'm glad we didn't get him then.
But
how stacked would this side have been? Christ.
But leading to calls of double standards because they sacked Sean Hoppy because he'd signed with the Warriors for 95.
Yeah.
So,
I remember thinking that was madness, and then we got Nagus and then Drucker.
So his pathway to a first grade return was out of action, but he still had a Kangaroo tour to think about. And so the decision to go to the bush was directly a result of trying to force his way into New South Wales and potentially Australia from the bush. And that was at the behest of David Barnhill, boss of the Country Rugby League, who suggested you'd play country first. You've got a chance to get back on the rep scene.
That's insane in 94.
Mm. So it didn't happen, obviously, but so he went to Umina, chiefly because his grandfather was living there and he thought it would be a good chance to spend some quality time with him.
I've been from Newcastle. I couldn't believe it. I said, he's playing for Umina? It's like, that's down the road. They're local league.
So the Umina Bunnies, obviously it caused a huge stir in the community. You had, choppers overhead, covering the return of MG.
What's funny about that is in Newcastle West, Newcastle are the glamour club with the big pokies den and whatever. Mm. So it was like West had bought another player. Yeah. Umina's like the glamour club of the Central Coast League.
And each week, the player of the match in the Umina team won the Golden Chop. And MG was very excited about that prospect. He said, forget the Rothmans medal, I want a Golden Chop. But very interestingly, but this is the last thing I've got to say about Umina. In that Central Coast comp, playing for Arimba was budding Daily Telegraph journalist Paul Kent.
Amazing.
And so he was already writing for the Telegraph at that point, and one of his colleagues had written a not so flattering piece about Mark Geyer. So when Mark Geyer saw Paul Kent lining up opposite him, this was Geyer's quote: "I thought God was listening to me." As Paul Kent recounts it, Geyer looked up and around. He saw me and pointed at me. "You're dead," he said. My teammates turned and smiled. They said, "I'd hate to be you." Umina charged down a kick. I chased the loose ball and Geyer was the only player close. I got there a fraction of a second before Geyer's elbow got to the back of my right ear. A brawl erupted, the crowd was delighted, and after a time we made our way to the sin bin. Separately, thank God. But it was telling. Eventually I was replaced because I experienced blind spots. The game ended and Geyer, apparently with all forgiven, told a teammate to say g'day. I was in the dressing room, vomiting only every 3 minutes or so. But he'd got square, and ever since we've got on well.
Gee up.
Now we'll go back to 1992 and Brandy. Mark Geyer spoke of the differences in their personalities, being that, Brandy kind of bottled up his emotions where Geyer, wore it all on his sleeve, which kind of speaks of the way they both handled their eventual Panthers departure. So, Brandy was a kind of a simmering, gradually disintegrating relationship, Geyer adopting a scorched earth policy.
Can I just say, we are both gigantic Brandy fans, both on the field and his analysis on TV. He still looks like a broken man. This is a irreversible change in a guy's personality, losing a brother.
Yeah, and he's said that, anytime he has spoken about it, that it's not something you get over,
No.
And I think, mentioning our love of Brandy, I think that's one of the reasons that it hit me so hard. Brandy was my absolute idol at that point. He was my number one guy. But so he took time away. He came back late in 92 when he really shouldn't have. He said that, football was the last thing on his mind. Not really, operating with any mental capacity, but, he thought it was somehow the right thing to do to come back to the field. And in 93...
You got to admire that. That's a team guy.
But then in 93, he came back, but there was no desire. His form really suffered because of it, which was understandable. You got to remember this. In 1992, Ricky Stewart was out injured early in the year. Brandy was the absolute, certainty to start at halfback for New South Wales that year. In the end, he got injured as well, and Stewart got back for games 2 and 3. But Brandy was in the top tier.
Yeah, it's always top tier.
Yeah,
from early on.
And then that fell away on the field and off the field. That lack of desire manifested itself into a fairly poor attitude. He missed training sessions, kind of turn up when he wanted, and not really put in, which led to disharmony within the team. Some of whom were like, you booted Geyer after 2 weeks, but, we've got this going on.
Different case.
It absolutely, we can say that, but if you're within that team, it's
just untenable from every angle. It's you can't say to the guy, "You lost your brother. We want you to try."
Yeah,
right. And you can't say to teammates, "We want you to try and follow the rules," but this guy doesn't have to. It's it's literally untenable.
It is. And there's no right or wrong way to deal with grief, and you have to understand that people are going to handle things in different way. But Gould's comment was quite telling, that I always felt he could have given more, that he could have gotten over the tragedy earlier, which sounds harsh. It sounds really harsh, and I don't think it was meant that way by Gould. But there is something to it that...
that's one of the most... that makes you sit back and, whoa, because in the end of the day, they want to win football games, and it's okay, well, this is the worst tragedy in the history of the game, but we got to win.
Yeah, yeah, and that's the difficult position that Phil Gould was placed in. That suddenly he's got this team that's falling apart around him, and there's nothing he can do about it. At one point in 93, he wanted to drop Brandy. His form had fallen to the point that he was an actual liability in the team. But when he said to Don Feltus, "I'm dropping Brandy this week," Feltus said, "You can't. You just can't do it."
Yeah.
And that was the position Gould was in. And then it got to the point where they started recruiting halfbacks for 94. Gould was saying to Brandy, I think you should go have a year in England, do something, So they went hard after Jason Taylor, missed out on him.
Luckily for them.
Yeah. Missed out on him, but got Gary Freeman in for 94.
Yeah.
And 94 was even worse because Freeman and Alexander basically wouldn't pass to the other one. The team harmony was falling apart. You think about that. So Gary Freeman and Trevor Gilmeister both come in for the 94 season.
You think that would have been great signings for any club?
But how difficult would it be for those guys as outsiders to arrive in this kind of environment? Can you imagine that?
But also this whole thing of Brandy can play fullback. It's like the guy is a half.
Yeah.
Right? He's a great athlete, could easily play fullback, but he's not a fullback.
Mm.
So yeah, we'll get Freeman, we'll put him at fullback.
Yeah.
Even at the Warriors, they'll sign him as a fullback.
Yeah, yeah.
It's like, he's not a fullback.
I think the thing is he was an athlete, he was quick, I agree, like absolute halfback, but...
he's one of the premier halfbacks of all time, but we'll put him at fullback.
But so when Gary Freeman came in, this was his quote of the situation. Gee, mate, I really don't... And this was in Phil Gould's book, so, this is Gary Freeman talking in 95 or so. Gee, mate, I really don't want to talk about it. I know they had some problems when I was there, but I just wanted to stay out of it. That's the God's honest truth. I'd say to Gus, what's happening? He'd tell me and I'd say, whatever.
Cheers, Wiz.
So in any other situation, getting like Gary Freeman and Trevor Gilmeister, who still was Trevor Gilmeister then in 94, Wayne Bennett, was devastated to have to lose him. And, the Broncos kind of went downhill in 94 partly because of that loss.
Does anyone love an enforcer more than Wayne Bennett? Maybe Sticky.
It leads me to a story my dad told me yesterday that he had a HR role at Carlton Breweries in the late 90s and they were going through a series of layoffs that he was involved in. So everyone at work was calling him Trevor Gilmeister. The axe. So 1994, from early on in the season, it was announced that Brandy had signed with the Warriors, but for months afterwards, he was still in interviews wrestling with the idea of, could I leave Penrith? And, coming down on the side of, I just want to stay here. I can't do it. Here's where I need to be.
Got two things to comment on this. Watching the season, I just remember them, Penrith are bad this year. Didn't really think... Oh, that's right. The guy died last year, and they're in turmoil. It didn't even cross my mind as a kid. I was just like, they're playing awful this year. And you're looking at it deeper as an adult. It's like, Jesus Christ. But this poor guy, not only has he lost his brother and best friend, he would have been a one-club player.
Yeah.
He would have been a legend, his career was derailed by this, then Super League. He had two of them.
Yeah.
No good.
And this speaks of where everyone was at the time. When he announced that he was signing to the Warriors and he was leaving, that Penrith, Gould's feeling was one of relief. Imagine that you're absolute best player of all time, leaves and all you feel is relief.
Say what you want about Gould, and we will and do, but he has got compassion for his friends. Yeah. And I think he's got more compassion for his friends than he has for football, to be honest. I won't sign off 8 different friends in the game. But I think that's a real mark of the man to feel relief there.
Yeah.
It's for Brandy's sake. Well, and the club, I suppose. But.
And almost instantly the club, I mentioned that sense of relief, and they knew that this is what they needed to get their all-time legend back in the fold. So at that point, they didn't think about him coming back as a player, which is what eventually happened. But they offered him the position of training director. So he signed for 2 years with the Warriors, and they said, come back in 97 and we'll put you in as training director. So already they knew that, this was a temporary blip.
Sorry, the guy that won't show up to training is going to be directing training, is that?
Well, I guess that's the thing. They felt that the 2 years would help him to, a change of scenery would help him get his mind right, which is what happened. I mean, he comes back to the Panthers in 97, plays for New South Wales that year.
Super League.
It still happened.
You know what? I remember being so excited about the Warriors, right? This is amazing. And they had Brandy. It was like, what a marquee signing.
Yeah.
Because, as a kid, you don't realise his mind's gone to mush. You just think, oh man, Brandy, he's going to make them win,
I was a big Phil Blake guy and a big Brandy guy. It's they got both of them.
Yeah.
But that Warriors squad, everyone was talking about it as it was going to be an instant rival to the Broncos.
Yeah.
It was you got the New Zealand team plus Brandy,
Exactly the talk I heard. and no one realised that they were only a 58-minute team for 25 years.
I mean, yeah, so you look at that first team, so, yeah, Brandy, Dean Bell, Dennis Betts.
All right, let's stop there.
Yeah.
Dean Bell and Dennis Betts, lauded as these two giants of the English game, no good.
Yeah. John Cohen, New Zealand rugby legend.
No good. Yeah. So, they wasted a lot of signings on names.
Yeah.
That was their Gary Morgan.
Yeah, yeah.
Times 3.
Yeah, definitely. I guess the idea was that it would legitimise them to a New Zealand public that was, rabid rugby union fans.
Yeah.
But, with the young blokes, they got it right,
Yeah.
I mean, Stephen Kearney was already basically established from West. But, having Stacey Jones there, Joe Vungana.
I think Tierra Party come back. He was at Newcastle.
Yeah, yep, you're right. Yeah, he was in that first squad. And getting Sean Hoppy at the top of his game as well.
I thought that was a great marquee signing. Yeah. Killer squad.
Killer squad. They got the name right, and that was one that had been decided in 1992 as well. Dominion Brewery were the sponsors of the team, so they put it out to the public.
Which beer company decided the fate of this club?
Well, I'm glad they had limited say, because one of their proposed names was the Auckland Bittermen.
Oh my bloody god!
So I'll tell you the other names in the mix. So yeah, the Warriors was there. That was the overwhelming crowd favourite, and I think they got it right. The Volcanoes, the Pirates, the Bittermen, the Orcas, and the Hawks.
Auckland Orcas. That's not too bad, actually.
It's not too bad, and when you think about it, killer whale's a pretty sick animal and very underrepresented.
You know how it would have went? Who you guys got in the weekend? Playing the Orcs.
Yeah.
That wouldn't be too bad.
Yeah. It was the Free Willy era. You would have got some jokes out of that somehow.
Okay, there would be a few players free and no willies, mate. You know what I'm saying? I think Warriors was the winner.
Yeah, and they had their logo basically from the start as well.
Logo was killer.
Yeah. Didn't like that colour scheme. I think the black and grey is definitely the best colours for them.
Rugby league jerseys, the initial ones, generally designed by a year 9 kid on their first attempt. Yeah. It's I don't know how they can get the colours in jerseys so wrong all the time. Anyway.
But I remember so clearly that first game against the Broncos with the tiki torches on the side.
Yeah.
I just remember thinking, how cool is this?
Yeah. It was magic.
Yeah. So Brandy did okay at the Warriors, came back to Panthers. As I said, played Super League Origin that year. There's something really beautiful about the ending that he and Geyer both got.
It was magnificent.
The fact that they were both there in 99 at Penrith for Brandy's last home game. Geyer, gave a stirring dressing room speech, which I'll let Roy Simmons, coach at the time, tell the story. There was nothing too intelligent in what he said. But it was good stuff, all raw emotion, and I think it had the desired effect.
You want to talk about one of the game's characters? Yeah. Roy Simmons, legend.
Brandy finished the end of 99. Geyer was squeezed out, salary cap reasons the year after, but, took that all with good spirit and said he didn't want to hold the young blokes back. I
love when guys go out like that. Instead of saying, I want to hold the young blokes back for an extra payday.
And I'll just give the last word to Paul Kent, who I think summed it up really well. Emotionally, he never quite made it to where he was physically. Not until the very end, anyway, by which time his physical abilities had begun to decline. If the two had ever peaked together, though, there is little doubt Geyer would have been the forward of his era.
But he's still remembered for what he did in the short burst.
Yeah.
He'll always be remembered as for greatness in a flash.
Yeah, definitely.
You can't tell Origin story without him.
No.
And you can't tell 91 without him.
Yeah, and put football aside, it's just so good to see him eventually find that emotional balance. And the fact that, obviously Gould's departed from the Panthers now, and we've had plenty to say about that in the past, but the fact that Brandy came back in the mix, coaching the halves, Geyer and Gould, best mates. I still loved watching them on the Sunday roast together.
Yeah. Also, he had the column in Rugby League when he was insulting everybody. I loved that because in a game of fence sitting, he was one of the only guys having an opinion.
Yeah.
Infuriating people, didn't care, and made his media career from it.
Yeah.
Loved it.
But for all the turmoil and tragedy we've just discussed, I wouldn't say it's a happy ending, but at least you can take out of that everyone involved has has made their peace.
I call it closure.
Yeah.
In some respects.
And speaking of which, that closes out this episode. I really hope you've enjoyed it, because this was very difficult to put together, very difficult to talk about, and I hope we've done it with justice and respect. But thank you for listening. Please send us your thoughts about this or anything else you want to tell us about, and we'll be back with part 2 of the 1994 story next week.